Next, I'd like to introduce Tom Piazza to give an overview of Benny Golson and his career. And let me just say a few words about Tom. Tom Piazza is well known both as a fiction writer and as a writer on music. He's the author of 7 books, including the novel My Cold War, which won the Faulkner Society Award for the novel, and the short story collection Blues and Trouble, which won the James Michener Award for fiction. As a writer on music, Piazza has regularly contributed to the New York Times, the Oxford American, the Village Voice, and many other publications. He won the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award for music writing for his book, The Guide to Classic Recording Jazz, and a 2004 Grammy Award for his album notes for the box set Martin Scorsese Presents the Blues, A Musical Journey. His newest book, Understanding Jazz, commissioned by Jazz at Lincoln Center, will be published by Random House this September. Ladies and gentlemen, let's meet Tom Piazza.
Okay, nice to see you all out here, and thank you. It's a great pleasure for me this evening to be able to introduce Benny Golson to you. We're privileged this evening to be with one of the real giants of American music since World War II. Benny Golson has been enormously influential, not just as a tenor saxophonist, but as a composer and as an arranger. And I'm going to read to you some material about his life and his career because I don't have the confidence that I'll be able to remember all of it. He was born in 1929 in Philadelphia, which is a city that's given us many great jazz musicians, not the least of which was John Coltrane, but also the Heath brothers, Ray Bryant and Tommy Bryant, so many people, Philly Joe Jones. After his early music studies, he attended Howard University in Washington, D.C., and after that, after some early work in the rhythm and blues field, Benny played in a number of ensembles in the 1950s, including groups led by Lionel Hampton, great vibraharp player, Johnny Hodges, Earl Bostic, and the great composer and arranger Tad Dameron, one of the seminal figures in the bebop era and afterwards, and a great influence on Benny Golson in his own composing and arranging. Benny's career began to pick up steam when he joined the big band of Dizzy Gillespie in 1956. And he spent about 2 years with Dizzy, arranging and also playing tenor. After the breakup of that band, he joined Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers. And the year he spent with Blakey was extraordinarily fruitful, and I think really saw the flowering of his own compositional and performing genius. Some of you probably know the album Moanin' by Art Blakey on Blue Note, which is arguably Blakey's greatest single recording, I would say. And it's famous for the title Cut, which was composed by the pianist Bobby Timmons and has a very famous solo by Lee Morgan on it. But that album is, as much as anything, a Benny Golson album. To it, he contributed the tunes Are You Real? Along Came Betty, and Blues March, very well-known piece, and also a kind of ambitious short suite featuring Art Blakey on mallets on drums called the Drum Thunder Suite. Also during that time, Mr. Golson composed some of the best-known jazz standards of that period, including the great ballad I Remember Clifford, dedicated to Clifford Brown, the trumpeter, and also Whisper Not, and Stablemates, which was a jazz standard. In late 1959, Benny organized one of the best small bands of what critics like to call the hard bop era, the Jazz Tet, with the great trumpeter Art Farmer. Really one of the undersung bands of that period, and it made a number of fantastic recordings. Its first record, its first album as a group was Meet the Jazz Tet, which had the famous Golson composition Killer Joe, some of you may know that, and the band featured Art Farmer on trumpet, Curtis Fuller on trombone, McCoy Tyner on piano, and really a fantastic group. And during that period, he was very active also as a freelancer around New York, and he recorded a number of albums under his own name, including Benny Golson's New York Scene, Groovin' with Golson, The Other Side of Benny Golson. And these are all fantastic records, and especially for those of you who are musicians, I'd recommend picking them up. They're all, each of them, more interesting than the standard kind of blowing session of that time where you had a succession of solos and not much else. They're all interestingly arranged, interestingly routined. And so I think at that period, Benny was really coming into his own as a composer per se, not just an arranger. Anyway, later in the 1960s, he moved to Los Angeles. He began focusing almost exclusively for a while on composing and arranging. And he worked at Universal Studios. And he scored music for Nancy Wilson, Diana Ross, Peggy Lee, many other singers. He wrote music for TV shows, commercials, and movies. Not the least the well-known TV series MASH, which he wrote music for better part of 3 years in the 1970s. His activities have continued to be diverse and wonderful, and he's still one of the most distinctive jazz tenor saxophonists who's ever lived, as you'll hear very shortly. I want to make a personal remark or two about Benny Golson's playing. There are some musicians who are very well known and much lauded who are still somewhat underappreciated. And I think it's fair to say that's true of Benny Golson. His style is one of the most unique and arresting styles, and it comes out of, I think, the tradition not so much of Lester Young and the more melodic players, but people like Don Byas and Lucky Thompson. And when you hear his playing, he's utterly individualistic, extremely swinging, but very unusual harmonically and rhythmically. Always stimulating, and it's just wonderful that he's still among us playing the way he is. And in fact, he just made a movie appearance, both playing and speaking, in Steven Spielberg's movie The Terminal with Tom Hanks, and he's going to talk about that too later in the evening. Anyway, we're about to hear him play. Let me introduce the members of his quartet. Fred Sanders on piano, David Polfus on bass, O.C. Davis on drums, and I hope you'll all join me in giving a big round of applause and a great welcome to the great Benny Golson.